Welcome to Global Connections on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about, can we count on the U.S. military? Hegseth and the Signal Chat scandal raised serious questions. Our guest for the show is Carl Baker, Senior Advisor at Pacific Forum. Welcome to the show, Carl.
Good to be back, Jay. It's always good to talk to you about what's happening in the global connected world today.
Same here. We spend nearly $1 trillion a year, something north of 900 billion on our military, and we must know and should know, and we should follow what they are doing and how well prepared they are for the conflicts we can now anticipate in and during the Trump administration. So I guess the first question I would ask you is, what is it about Pete Hegseth? Is he qualified? And if he's not qualified, how dangerous is that to the military and the country?
That's a kind of a difficult question to say. Is he qualified? Is he qualified in the normal sense of who former defense secretaries were or are? No, he's not. I mean, he doesn't have the background. He was an army reserve officer. He never really served in any meaningful capacity to qualify him to run something called the Department of Defense. He's a former Fox News host, and so he certainly is somebody who's been around defense. But to say that he's qualified in the traditional sense, no, he's not. I don't think he is. So, but again, that is only partly concerning, because we've had others, I think, who probably weren't as qualified as they could have been. Is he the most qualified? Certainly not. There certainly are better people who could manage the Department of Defense in the traditional sense of managing the Department of Defense. But these are different times. We aren't, I think, terribly interested in the current administration. I think is terribly interested in someone who is a traditional person who would manage the Department of Defense, and they've shown that by removing several of the first the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and also several of the service.
I wanted to talk to you about that. I wanted to talk to you about removal of all the Joint Chiefs. And what does that mean? What does it mean that Trump is looking for loyalists in the military? It's kind of scary, because the military is an example of our power on the ground, our military power, which is more and more important in a world where we don't have allies anymore. And I wonder, how important is it that we have independent, in the traditional sense, independent top-line military officers, because we don't have that.
Well, it's a fundamental principle of the military not being a political organization, of course. And you watch the confirmation hearings on General Kane, the presumptive chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he has said the right things. He has said that he will support his commitment to defending the Constitution, which is the key factor in any military officer's oath of allegiance, is that he is bound by the Constitution, not by a particular person.
But we've seen so many people come up for confirmation in front of the United States Senate, and somehow they magically change their mind 24 hours later. I'm thinking of Brett Kavanaugh, Roe v. Wade. I'm thinking of all these guys that promised us what we wanted to hear, including the intelligence community. And in my humble opinion, they were lying because they didn't really mean it at the time. Did Kane mean it at the time? Yeah.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, certainly the circumstances surrounding his selection are very suspect, and and to some extent he disavowed some of that history that Trump is trying to portray, that he wore the MAGA hat. He said, no, I didn't do that. I've never done it. I've never worn political merchandise, and so yeah, he's saying all the right things, just like everybody else who got it in front of, as you say, in front of the hearings in the Senate, and they said the things that you wanted to hear. Is he going to follow through? There's no way to know. The fact is that General Brown was relieved for no particular cause other than Donald Trump didn't like it.
Oh, it might have been racist then. What do you think?
Well, we don't have that anymore. We only have merit, right? Yeah, so I mean, they want to talk like that, and so you can't. How can you argue? How can you argue that General Brown had made a strong commitment to uh, equity and inclusion, and that's been a fundamental part of the military. If you understand, the military, back in the '60s when we were having riots on military bases, and there was this huge problem with race relations, along with the Vietnam War protesters. There was a strong commitment made in the late '60s, early '70s to making the military an inclusive organization. And now what you're seeing is, the latest is the Naval Academy had to remove 400 books from the library because they weren't consistent with the new principles of the administration. So clearly, we're not going to look at that. We're going to pretend that inclusivity isn't important. In fact, it's a weakness, not a strength, which is something that we've been saying for basically 50 years. So the whole mindset has changed. So again, is Pete Hegseth the best qualified person to manage the Department of Defense? No, not in the context of the traditional sense. But again, these are new times. It's more important beyond just the personalities here. Let's get at what the military now represents in this transactional age. The military, there's an old Navy advertisement that shows you a series of pictures of war machines, and then the end statement is U.S. Navy, a force for good. And I've always said, well, who's good? Even back in the good old days when we thought we understood the liberal world order and that the United States was the world's policeman, the United States was the ultimate defender of the rules-based order. In the transactional world of today, who's good? Clearly, it's made very clear in this administration that the good is for the safety of the United States, the strength of the United States, and the prosperity of the United States. So if you have a Navy that has global reach, whose good is that Navy serving? I mean, if you want to talk about the signal chat, which, bafflingly, there are people who have said that this demonstrated the depth of discussion on critical national issues, mind you, on a chat, on a signal chat. This is what we call in-depth discussion of national security issues of life and death. Seriously? And the point I'm going to make is that we didn't know if we really wanted to pursue this particular action because it might send the wrong signal to Europe that we were actually defending something that was more important to the Europeans than to the Americans. So now I go back to my question, who's good? So now we're only going to do things that are good for America because we don't really need the world order anymore. So I think that this transactional age changes the whole dynamic of this global presence that the Department of Defense has. How long are our allies going to tolerate this military force that is clearly not for the good of the world order, but good for Americans' narrow transactional interests?
As Trump sees it.
As Trump sees it, yes.
Yeah. Well, so how important is it that the Secretary of Defense be qualified? How important is it that the Joint Chiefs be qualified and independent? Or is the military machine a kind of, may I say, bureaucracy, which goes by itself? And I suppose what my concern is that if all these people are like conduits for Trump's policies and what he wakes up in the morning with, they're really just repeating his orders to them, and query whether there's any level in the military that says, wait, that's not for good for America. That's bad for America, and that's a bad policy decision. If they're all acolytes, where's the resistance? Where's the guardrails for what, 1 million people in uniform.
No, I mean, and it's not just 1 million people in uniform, it's the rest of the world who is potentially going to suffer from those military actions that are taken in the interest of who knows who. So it's very much a concern, and you've seen it in the media. People have talked about it. Is what happens with an illegal order. I mean, first of all, moving the U.S. troops into the border area of the United States to defeat immigration, if you will. This is a movement toward the involvement of U.S. military in civil order in the United States, and this is a big concern because the definition of civil military relations in the United States has always been that the United States military will not be involved in civil enforcement of civil order. And so this is a big concern that this could happen very easily with military troops down on the border, that you get into a chase of some American citizen, and the American citizen is now killed by the U.S. military. This is the violation. This is a crude example of the violation of that prohibition against engagement in civil law enforcement.
It reminds me of an event that I want to tell you about. A young fellow with whom ThinkTech was associated got out of the Navy. And it was not too long after Trump, in his first term, instructed the commanding officer of the USS McCain, which was then in Yokosuka Harbor, American base in Yokosuka, that he didn't like the idea of the USS McCain showing the name of the ship. So he instructed the captain of the ship, this would have been an interesting conversation, to drape over the name of the ship. So that's what they did. And the captain of the ship did not resist, and neither did anybody in the crew resist. Nobody said, is that legal? Can you drape over the name of our ship when you're motivated only by political motivations? And so I asked the young fellow, not that he was on the McCain, but he was in the Navy and he was a seaboard sailor, just got out. I said, if somebody gave you an order to drape over the name of your ship for political purposes, and it was obvious it was political purposes, would you do that, or would you question the command? And he said, I think you can probably guess what he said. He said, of course I would follow that order, because without knowing more, I have to assume that every order is legal. And so there's no question about it. I would drape over the name of the ship. And I think, the nature of the American military now is such that there's not a whole lot of people. In World War II, it might have been different, in the nature of the military now is that if an order is given, it has to be grossly illegal, grossly offensive before anybody will say anything. Therefore, if you have the instructions coming down from on high, and you have them passing through this kind of conduit of loyalists who are at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, then the rest of the military is going to perform that order, because they follow orders. That's what they do. They're trained to do it at the academies, and they're trained to do it in the field. And if you don't want to do it, you're going to wind up in the brig, and you won't like that because they don't treat you nicely in the brig. So the question, has there been a dynamic on this? Do you think it's different today than it was, say, 5, 10 years ago?
Oh, sure. No question. I mean, I think you saw this in the first Trump administration, that there were questions about how loyal you should be to orders like you just gave the example of. It's not egregious enough that someone at a low level, say a captain of a ship, would actually resist that order, especially since it flowed through the military chain. And what you're talking about is you weaken that potential for resistance as you put loyalists in the positions. And then let's talk about the other thing that Trump did at the beginning of the administration, is he removed all the judge advocates from all the services and replaced them with who? We don't know. But you've got to believe that there was a loyalty test involved. And this is what what is happening, not just in the military, but all over. Even if you look at what's happened with people working with the embassies overseas, everybody has had to sign this sort of mafia style loyalty oath to the objectives of this particular administration. And they make it sound like this is the voice of the people. This is the voice of 49.8% of the people. But nonetheless, it's the administration trying to put its policies as the American policy. And so it doesn't matter whether it's in the Constitution. It doesn't matter if it's well, somewhat questionable. As long as the administration says it's okay, that is the American policy. I've even had the example where people say, well, you can't challenge that. You have to represent the American view. And this is what they're trying to put. They're trying to memorialize in all new contracts now. You have to have a statement saying that you will faithfully adhere to the policies of this administration, whether those policies are driven by grievance, if they're driven by some other personal vendetta, it doesn't matter. We have to do that because this is the will of the people. And I think that this is a very dangerous area and a very dangerous situation for the military. Going back to what I had said earlier, is I think that, people who thought they were friends of America and are now looking at tariffs based on willy-nilly calculations are not going to be too long before they say, well, what are we doing here? Why are we hosting these U.S. military forces? They're not serving our purposes. They're serving American purposes and very narrowly defined American purposes. So I see, not only is the potential for resistance to political manipulation eroding at the high levels, but other countries in the world are now questioning, well, what is this Navy? Who's good is it serving? It's not probably serving our interests. It's serving very narrow American interests. And so now you start looking at, well, maybe somebody else could do a better job of policing our part of the world. And then you get to the point where you start looking at China and its capacity to basically control its maritime region, and Russia and the whole Eurasian continent is now up for grabs because we can't really rely on the United States to serve that purpose of the ultimate enforcer of the international order. The military is the last stop in that process, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had military action, although one of Trump's promises is he wouldn't put boots on the ground. He's done a couple of attacks already on Yemen, on the Houthis in Yemen, and he's threatened attacks on Iran. And he's actually, I believe, he's encouraged Netanyahu to resume the war in Gaza. So you have more violence than you had before. And the military, and he's got the ships out in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, ready to go.
He's got the B-2s in Diego Garcia.
Yeah. So he's ready to go, and he's really interested in expressing his power. And this is very difficult. One of the things about the Yemen attack was that he didn't consult with allies or former allies about that. He just made that decision by himself. And I think we can expect more of that.
Well, it's not even clear to me that he actually made that decision. If you read the texts of the Signal chat, there was one person who said, "Yep, Trump's on board with this," and that we never really heard from Trump. He's disassociated himself with the whole thing because it looked a little too messy for him, perhaps. And so we have SM, the mystical who is SM. Well, he's the guy who said, "Yeah, Trump is on board with this." So, yeah, I mean, this was how a policy was made. We decided to kill 53 people, and we never did learn who this person that we needed to kill was or why he was so important to anything. We just did that, and we did it based on a Signal chat. There was no conversation about this at the National Security Council. There was no convening of people in a secure facility to talk about the implications of killing 53 people for, well, whose interest? It wasn't even clear. It was borderline. The United States only had a small percentage of goods flowing through the Red Sea, so it was really to help Europe. Why should we do that? Those terrible people, they don't provide their end of the support for European defense. So it was a very sort of callous maneuver of deciding that 53 people had to die uh, for the purpose of what? Of removing a head of the missile uh, contingent at the Yemeni or at the Houthi rebel camp. That's a pretty unsettling sort of policy maneuver, policy mechanism involved in making those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, it was really a clown car kind of thing. Oh, and to say also that they were making statements about our former allies that were really insulting. Pejorative remarks about some of the countries that we probably should have consulted with. It wasn't just the attack information. It was comments that were completely unnecessary about Europe.
Yeah.
I say to myself, this is really a clown car. These guys demonstrate all within the bounds of that chat that they're really not able to make important decisions or even carry them out. They're not serious people. And it leads me to ask you, some of the people in that chat were intelligence. And we've had, confirmation issues with the intelligence people too. I mean, thinking of Tulsi Gabbard, for example. It's just remarkable how little help she was. And to put her on that chat, to put her in the decision process, to put the intelligence community in the decision process when those people are not qualified either, it's very troubling. They get together and make huge mistakes.
I agree. I mean, I think, and that's the weird part is the administration and its supporters are saying, wow, this really demonstrates the in-depth expertise we have in the Security Council. And you have to wonder, are they being serious? Are they being cynical? What are they talking about? That this was a well thought out maneuver? Has there been a follow through? Has there been any thought of what that accomplished, other than we put out emojis with strong arms and American flag and fire? I mean, that's who we have making big national security decisions in our country. That's just simply unsettling.
And the Congress isn't going to investigate it. Trump thinks it's of no importance, and we're just leaving it in the historical dustbin right now. No action taken.
Well,
no government, no official sanction to anybody involved.
No sanction, but to give credit where credit is due, the Department of Defense has said they will have the Inspector General look into it. So DOD is at least saying they're going to investigate with the Inspector General. Of course, the Inspector General, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure the DOD Inspector General was removed at the beginning of the Trump administration as well.
Yeah, he'd be an acolyte too, I think. I mean, and it's the same way they removed all the JAG lawyers.
Right.
Take anyone out of the recipe who could possibly resist. Let me go to a thought that keeps occurring for me. It's Kent State in the late 60s. You had American kids in the National Guard who ordered to fire on American kids at Kent State. And they did. They fired at their own generation. Could be their brothers and sisters. They fatally fired at them. I say to myself, and it goes to a point you made earlier, is it's not hard. It's not hard to get the military to take orders like that. If they were deployed, domestically, and you ordered them to fire on kids at Kent State or anybody like that, they would. As far as they're concerned, like the John McCain ship. If it's not obviously illegal, if it's part of their training, their mm, operational structure, they would fire. And that's pretty scary domestically, but it's also scary internationally, where you have these aberrant attacks going on. And so the question I pose to you is the military um, in a different place as far as executing the orders of the president? I mean, for example, we have potential um, conflict with Denmark and Greenland, with Canada, with Mexico. I don't know where else. And if he wakes up with a bright idea one day and tells his friends in the Joint Chiefs, you got to do this, that, and the other thing, and Hegseth will do it, and they will do it, and the men on the ground, the women on the ground will do it. And we have the hardware, we have the technology, and we will do it, even if it's not good for anybody, including the United States. I think we're in a different place now. It used to be there were elements of the greatest generation in the American military. And if you look at the military academies, you would see that. And I remember having a conversation, I don't know, 20 years ago with somebody who was a cadet at West Point. And I was so impressed that he had a moral sense, even a diplomatic sense. But somewhere along the line, Carl, these military officers got to be diplomats. I think that's over. They're not diplomats. They just follow orders. And it's pretty scary to me to see how that has changed. I mean, one of the books you talked about, removed from the academy, was the biography of Jackie Robinson. Give me a break. Is that offensive to the fighting people of our nation? Anyway, it's not a good picture. Where does it go from here?
I don't know. I mean, that's the big question: is how strong is our alliance relationship with the current allies? I mean, how long is Europe going to tolerate? We seem to think that somehow, Pete Hegseth was just out in Asia, reassuring the Philippines and reassuring Japan that we're in for the long haul and that we stand together with the Philippines and with Japan. We strongly support the Japanese buildup of its defense capabilities. But when you the following week put tariffs on these countries that there's basically no way to satisfy the Americans, or specifically Donald Trump, because he apparently has the final say on whether tariffs are going to be enforced or not be enforced, and when they've satisfied him, if they come groveling to his feet, then he might say, yeah, okay, we'll let tariffs go on the Philippines, but otherwise you're facing 46% tariffs. So how long does the Philippines say, yeah, I think this is a good solid ally I think we can work with? It's part of a bigger picture. We have no economic policy anymore other than what's good for what's good for the United States is good for everybody else because we said so. So there's no bigger picture. There's no broader comprehensive view of what a security relationship is. We have a military and we will probably defend you, but I don't know. We'll have to look at the circumstances at the time. If there's a better transaction to be had with Xi Jinping, we may take it. I don't know. We'll decide at the time. I mean, this is kind of where we're at. Is that there's no more overarching commitment on the part of the Americans to maintain these alliances, these military alliances. So the military alliances can't be viewed as something out there not connected to the rest of American foreign policy and American economic policy. And this is exactly what's happened. And so, when you look at the cascade of events that have happened since January 20, you have to think at some point the military is going to be viewed as not a force for good, not a force for global good, but very much a force for U.S. good. And what is U.S. good? Who's defining that U.S. good today? Donald Trump? Well, Donald Trump good is basically self-aggrandizement, as best I can tell, and not necessarily what's good for America. Certainly not good for people who had money in the stock market today. So it really is going to, I think, become very challenging to continue to defend what the Americans are calling their military alliance commitments and relationships in the rest of the world. Beginning in Europe is where the big challenge is going to come. I think the European Union is very much recognizing that it cannot rely on the United States. This has become evident with Ukraine. It's become evident with the decision to do tariffs without looking at the whole picture. I think that it's going to become very difficult for the Americans to maintain the sense that there is a military commitment on the part of the United States to support its allies and to work with their allies in addressing global conflicts, global military conflicts.
After that regrettable meeting in the Oval Office, Trump stopped sharing intelligence information with Ukraine, which was really a hard blow because they needed that intelligence information to spot their targets and make their moves. But that's over. And shortly thereafter, my recollection is that we stopped sharing intelligence information. I'm not sure who began the effort on that, with Europe in general, with NATO. We're pulling out of NATO little by little. You know how gradually, with the frog in the water, little by little, we're not involved. And you couldn't, let's see if you agree with me, you couldn't count on Article 5 right now. You couldn't count on Article 5 by them responding to an attack on the US, or the US more likely responding to attack on them. And so, that kind of bond seems to be over. And I think of the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, which I know you're very familiar with down in Waikiki. And the people who are the students there come from all over Asia Pacific, and a lot of them are military. And we try to bond up with them. We try to have relationships that will last, in the past anyway, through decades of, historical evolution. But I wonder how that works now. If I were a member of that class, I'm not sure I'd feel so good about going to the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. What good is it going to do me if I can't trust the United States? And you can try to make me feel good, but I don't feel good. So I think you have the intelligence separation, you have the NATO separation, you have this, call it the diplomatic connections at the military level. I know you've seen that. I've seen that too. For a time, the military was involved in a diplomatic effort with other militaries and other officials in other countries. I'm not sure how that works anymore. And this goes to the question of whether we here can rely on our military to get the job done. We're an isolationist nation. We have only former allies. We have conflicts hither and yon. Can we rely on the military? I'm wondering whether the young people whose enlistments are coming up will re-enlist. If it was me, Carl, I would not. I wonder how they feel about it. Your thoughts? Are they as effective as they used to be as a fighting force?
The effectiveness of the fighting force hasn't changed. What's changed is everything surrounding. And so, I mean, there's so many ways to answer your question, because technically there's something else that's happened in the context of Ukraine. There's a whole different kind of warfare out there. There's this massing of drones. There's a poor man's military that can very easily defeat big, expensive legacy systems built by legacy defense contractors. And so that's one aspect of whether they're an effective fighting force. Maybe not. I mean, you still got aircraft carriers as the heart of the American military capacity, specifically in Asia, especially in Asia. And that is not a very effective force when you have the capacity of almost even the Houthis to send drones out after a ship in the middle of the ocean. You don't need to be sophisticated anymore with all the access you have to drone technology, to cheap missile technology, relatively cheap drone technology, and then the command and control systems to employ them. It becomes very difficult for a legacy based military to be effective. So we've been shooting down Houthi missiles, but those are drones with big expensive missiles. And so, for every $8 billion we spend on missiles, we kill 20 drones. So the balance is just not there. Because you've just wasted $8 billion on $100,000 worth of equipment. That's not a good calculation when it comes to trying to win a war or win a battle. So in that sense, no, the force is struggling, and the force needs to adapt to today's technology and to today's fighting environment. And so that's one part of it. But then the other part of it is the broader part, which is more interesting to me, is we've lost the context when you talk about what's happening at the Daniel K. Inouye Center for Security Studies. That's a small part of what's happened, because we've taken away foreign aid. Foreign assistance is now redefined as being, is it in the American interest for safety, strength, and prosperity? Well, no, you can never really say that giving foreign assistance to somebody is strengthening American prosperity, because it's a prosperity that's globalized and then only secondarily comes back to the United States. So we can't do that anymore. So let's get rid of USAID. Let's get rid of Radio Free Asia. Let's get rid of anything that looks like it's not directly related to American prosperity and American strength. So that's the broader context. I think that is also inhibiting our capacity as a military force. We aren't talking about enforcing a global order anymore. We aren't talking about, again, going back to my favorite advertisement of the Navy ship. Those things on that ship are airplanes that kill people. Those airplanes aren't for my good anymore. They're now for the good of American strength, demonstrating American strength and the prosperity of America. Well, does that prosperity of America include invading Denmark or invading Greenland so that we can get Denmark? Or sorry, I keep saying Denmark, so we can get Greenland because it's rightly ours. Do we invade Panama because we're worried about the safety of our ships passing through the canal? Do we force Canada to become a state? I mean, what, we're going to occupy Ottawa? Where does it stop? And what is the military's role in that? Because the military still has the capacity. It still has the capacity. Granted, it doesn't have the capacity that it did when it was fighting other legacy militaries. But now you have a two-pronged problem, was what I'm describing really, is you have the capacity of the military force itself, but then you also have this weakened environment that we've created ourselves. This is a self-inflicted wound that we now have to rationalize to the rest of the world why our military is still hanging out in ports far away when all we're really there for is American narrow transactional interests.
Remind me that Canada had a deal to buy F-35s and maybe in the future F-47s, but they gave all that up a week or two ago, and they're going to buy French fighters now. So that means that they're not going to be looking to the U.S. for parts and software upgrades and so forth, ammunition probably too. And so I know that's not a big deal. It was probably billions of dollars, but it wasn't a big deal in terms of the economy of either the U.S. or Canada. But it strikes me that it's a symbolic statement that they're going to buy from France. Now, you mentioned that the Ukraine war has taught us a lot of lessons. One of those lessons is Putin's lesson of hybrid war, of hacking, of political invasiveness, of trying to get puppet governments in place and so forth. And I see that as a war. He's done that all over the Russia borders into East Europe, and for that matter, West Europe. He's been charged with sabotage of aircraft with bombs by the UK authorities. And so there's all kinds of things you can do without putting an aircraft carrier out there, and or even a drone, which is a much smaller task. And I wonder how all of this that we've been talking about affects the ability of the United States to deal in hybrid wars, not only to defend against them, defend against Putin, should he try that. And there are those people who threaten, terrorism attacks on the U.S. all the time. That may happen after the business with the Houthis, but also, to do our own hybrid war. You can't get along these days without having allies through a BRICS organization, perhaps, and having the technology that will give you hybrid war. And we don't have that, I don't think. Maybe you know more.
I'm not sure what you mean by we don't have a capacity for hybrid war. I mean, I think the United States has worked on that it does have the capacity to damage infrastructure. If you look at, the incident, what was it called with Iran? I can't remember the name of it anymore. When we basically introduced software into their
it's the sticks. What was it? Something
Stuxnet. Stuxnet. That's what it was.
Stuxnet.
Yeah. Where we introduced software to affect the enrichment, uranium enrichment process. And
wasn't that Israel? That was Israeli technology.
Well, yeah, okay. But certainly it was done in collaboration with the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, the point is that the United States does have those capabilities, and it's working very hard at cyber capabilities. So I certainly don't know enough about it to be intelligent, because I don't have the classified access to all the stuff that happens, and clearly that sort of stuff is classified beyond anything I even want to know. But,
let me add that classification these days is a different kettle of fish. Well, classification can be in a bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, but that's just my thought.
Yeah. Let's not get into that. But I mean, there are still elements of the U.S. military that I think respect classification or restrictions, and certainly that area is something where I'm sure there's a lot of work that's going on that isn't visible to the rest of us. If there's anything you could say about the U.S. military, is it does have the capacity to learn and to develop new techniques in areas that are well beyond just the deployment of aircraft carriers and bombs.
Well, after Hegseth got into the job, he started firing people, and there were tens of thousands of people he fired from DoD. And of course, we know that a lot of research has been stopped for lack of grants at many college campuses, like the UARC program, affiliated research. And I wonder whether we have lost the ability to develop our own new technology, dual use technology maybe, but warfighter technology that can be used in a hybrid form.
Oh, sure. I mean, clearly this is part of that. Even during the Biden administration, the talk about the access to technology. I mean, one of the things that I think has been carried over from the Biden administration is the attempt to control access to technology. I mean, ultimately, it's the actions that we've taken are going to make it fail even faster than it would have anyway. But clearly, there's an attempt by the United States to control access to technology. But as you remove scientists, and as you remove immigrants who want to work in math departments and engineering departments in the United States, you push that technology and you push that expertise to other places. And this is exactly what's happening. Clearly, China is trying to buy these people who are inclined to go to China. Europe has very openly been offering positions to people who've been removed or let go from universities because they lost their research funding from the United States. And that's clearly happening. I mean, that doesn't happen overnight, but it happens over the span of 4 years for sure. So come back in 4 years and see where we are in terms of the technology fight we're having with China. And I think it's pretty clear China will prevail in this arena, that they will capture a lot of the technology. And China is putting state money against that research. So you can just assume that they will continue to do that, and they will continue to outpace the United States in its capacity to do scientific research, which leads to operationalization, commercialization of those technologies. And as they do that, they build their military. They talk about the civil military fusion in China. That's just a different way to say that the military is going to use civilian technology to enhance its warfighting capabilities, just like the United States has done for a long time. But as you stop funding that research, it becomes more and more difficult for the military to capture that research technology back and integrate it into military capabilities. So clearly, as this idea of hybrid war and the diversification of technology to integrate military capabilities, you end up losing because you stop funding that research and you stop providing the funds to integrate that into military related technology.
One last thing I want to ask you, and it's this: what we do, and what the Secretary of Defense and his Joint Chiefs do, has an effect on other countries. And if they look and see that we have a kind of circus going on in terms of leadership, like the signal chat issue, they may recalculate their moves, thinking that maybe the U.S. isn't so effective anymore, and they can play with us, and strategies would be different. And for example, and after the chat scandal came up, all of a sudden China was doing more overflights in and around Taiwan. And I'm saying to myself, and maybe this has something to do with the Middle East also, I don't know. But something that we did gave them an opportunity that they moved into. And so I think there's a relationship between the news, the media coverage of what Hegseth is doing or not doing, and the moves of our adversaries. Do you agree?
I can agree. I mean, in principle, sure, they respond to what they see, for sure. I mean, I agree. But again, the larger issue here is the military is part of the whole package, and the whole package looks weak. I mean, you talk about the signal scandal, and it's important, and it's important not only because of the inattention to operational security, but also to the depth of discussion that was actually had over a decision. Now look at what happened yesterday, and you look at how did we make these decisions about tariffs? I mean, there's some interesting stuff out there on the internet today talking about how they did the calculation. And in fact, somebody pointed out that all you have to do is just do a search on the AI engines, Grok, Chat GPT, Gemini, and they all come back with the same thing, exactly what we did. And you said it looks like a graduate student, maybe one of Musk's boys had some time and just did a quick Google search on it and said, "Oh, here, this is how you do tariffs." I mean, it looks like a complete amateur. So again, it just reinforces the thing that you're talking about. Is countries look at this and they say, "This really is a foundry, and why don't we just take advantage of it where we can?" So it goes well beyond the military, whether Taiwan, whether the Chinese exercises in Taiwan are directly connected, doesn't really matter. The fact is that they begin to see that the American administration appears to be almost incapable of deep thought policy. And so it becomes so transactional and so dependent on one guy's whims, that it becomes easy to work around it and to defeat it.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, there were articles in both the New York Times and the Washington Post today finding all these errors in the calculations that were released and the statements that Donald Trump made from the Rose Garden yesterday. And it was just rife with errors and miscalculations. And both newspapers had a whole analysis of that. But my last question for you, Carl, and this is, this is with respect to your career in diplomacy, in diplomatic relations, matters of the State Department. And I can see somebody in the diplomatic service who has had a robust relationship with his opposites in a given country. Now at some diplomatic meeting where his opposite takes him aside and says, sorry, but we don't think the same way about you that we did a few weeks ago. Our level of diplomacy, our level of discussion has got to be different because you are no longer the one who can make good policy decisions. You are no longer the one who's motivated by any kind of real good, I mean, moral good. And you are no longer the one that has an effective military, too. So your position vis-a-vis my country is different. Get used to it. Is this kind of conversation going to happen? Is it happening now?
Yeah, it's happening now. I mean, you see it just in the responses to the tariff thing today. You see it from the European Union. You see it from Japan. You see it from Canada. Yes, it's out there and it's going to get worse. That's the whole point that I'm making is who's good. It's not, we now understand it's your good, not our good. And this comes out, and it's going to come out more and more, that what's the difference between China and the United States? If you remember, this goes back to the conversation we had last time when we were talking about North Korea. What is a rogue state? What is a pariah state in today's world? Is it somebody who doesn't align with you? So is China the rogue state, or is the United States the rogue state? Depends where you sit, right? So I think this is really what's happening, and this goes to your point. Is the United States is no longer the city on the hill. It's no longer the what we aspire to. What we've done is we've created a United States that we want people to fear. So respect comes out of fear, not out of admiration, and that's what's happening, and that's why you don't have the alternative to say, well, we're going to send our military to help you. Well, wait a minute. All of a sudden you're going to help us? Look at all the things you've done to hurt us. So yeah, so this whole thing falls apart. And that's what's so disheartening to me, having worked for so long with people from other countries to promote international standards, to promote the international good. Now we're looking at a situation where they're saying, well, you guys don't believe in this anymore. You're not going to set the standards anymore because you gave up that privilege. And this is something I think that came out of someone from the European Union saying, you guys understand that you're not going to be part of the standards anymore. And I see it in discussions with people from Asia talking about the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. They say, look, you guys go ahead, but we're probably going to include China in the CPTPP, and we're going to set our own standards, and we're going to build just like we're doing with the WTO. We've set up our own standards for trade, and the United States is excluding itself. We're not excluding it. You're excluding yourself. So it's isolationist in the sense that we are self-isolating from the international system. The international system is there. Emanuel Wallerstein made a point a long time ago that the capitalist system is a global system. And what we're doing is we're moving away from the core. We're voluntarily removing ourselves from the core and moving ourselves to the periphery. And the new core is being built outside of the United States by doing what we're doing right now. by taking selfish self-national interest and saying we can operate outside of the global system. Well, you can't, not for long, because the rest of the global system will move on without you. And this is what I see happening. And so the military, in this context, the military is a factor, but it's not the main factor, because the military becomes secondary. It's still the blunt instrument that enforces global norms and global order. But we're not that force anymore. We're now just another force for our own good, not for the world's good.
Wow, Carl. Thank you for that. Really important. Thanks so much to our guest, Carl Baker, Senior Advisor, Pacific Forum. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Global Connections. We've been discussing, can we count on the U.S. military going forward? Big question. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.